The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation. A cavernous space packed with seasoned attorneys clad in crisp suits, their polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Rows of oak benches stretched across the room, filled with onlookers whispering among themselves, their murmurs blending with the faint rustle of legal pads and the occasional creak of a chair. At the front, elevated on his judicial throne, sat Judge Theodore Morrison, a man whose stern features bore the weight of decades spent wielding the gavel. His silver hair caught the light as he leaned back in his high-backed chair, his sharp eyes glinting with a mix of authority and thinly veiled amusement. Before him stood a solitary figure, a 17-year-old girl named Chloe Evans, dwarfed by the grandeur of the room. Her oversized hoodie hung loosely over her slight frame, the faded fabric brushing against her scuffed sneakers, which squeaked faintly as she shifted her weight. She stood alone at the defense table, her posture steady despite the sea of skepticism surrounding her. "Miss Evans," Judge Morrison began, his voice dripping with condescension as it sliced through the room's tension. "I hope you realize where you are. This is a court of law, not some high school debate club." A ripple of laughter erupted from the gallery, the sound bouncing off the wood-paneled walls like a wave. The attorneys seated behind their gleaming desks exchanged smirks, their pens pausing momentarily as they savored the judge's jab. Chloe, however, didn't flinch, her dark eyes locked onto Morrison's, unyielding, as though she could see straight through his mockery to the core of his doubt. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her tone calm yet edged with a quiet strength that seemed to surprise even herself. "I understand perfectly. I'm here to represent my client, Peter Walker." The laughter swelled again, louder this time, as if the very notion of this teenager stepping into such a role was too absurd to entertain. In the prosecution's corner, Miranda Steele, a veteran lawyer known for her icy precision, leaned toward her co-counsel, Marcus Reed. Her lips curled into a faint, disdainful smirk as she adjusted her tailored blazer. Reed, a broad-shouldered man with a reputation for theatrical flair, didn't bother to hide his amusement. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head as he muttered, "This is ridiculous." Rising from his seat with a flourish, he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I move to have this nonsense dismissed immediately. Miss Evans clearly lacks the qualifications to—" "Sit down, Mr. Reed," Chloe cut in, her voice sharp and steady, slicing through his objection like a well-honed blade. The room fell silent, a collective gasp hanging in the air as every head turned toward her. Even Judge Morrison blinked, momentarily thrown by her audacity. "If you'd let me present my case," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "you might actually learn something." The weight of her words settled over the courtroom, daring anyone to challenge her further. Morrison's amused smirk twisted into a scowl, his bushy brows knitting together as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice dropping to a low, ominous timbre, "you're treading dangerously close to contempt. I'd advise you to choose your next words carefully." Chloe didn't back down. She squared her shoulders, her heart pounding beneath her hoodie, though her face betrayed none of her inner turmoil. "I'm fully aware of the consequences, Your Honor," she said evenly. "But my client deserves a fair defense, and I intend to give him one." Across the room, Miranda Steele rose with the grace of a predator, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "Your Honor," she drawled, her voice smooth yet laced with venom, "this child's presence here is an insult to the integrity of this court. Peter Walker deserves proper representation, not this." She waved a dismissive hand toward Chloe, as if brushing away a pesky fly. "I object to being called this," Chloe shot back, her tone firm and unflinching. She turned slightly, casting a glance at her client, "and I believe Mr. Walker would agree. Isn't that right, Mr. Walker?" Peter Walker, a weary man in his 40s, sat hunched at the defense table, his threadbare suit hanging loosely on his frame. His tired eyes flickered with a mix of hope and uncertainty as he nodded. "Yes," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "Miss Evans has my full trust." Morrison raised a hand, his gavel hovering as if poised to strike. "Enough," he barked, his patience visibly thinning. "Miss Evans, the court will grant you a temporary chance to proceed." But if I find you're wasting our time, you'll regret it." Reed scoffed, slumping back into his chair with a dramatic flair. "This should be entertaining," he muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. Chloe ignored him, her hands steady as she set a thick stack of papers onto the table with a resounding thud. The sound echoed faintly, a declaration of her resolve. She stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking against the floor as she addressed the judge and jury with a composure that belied her age. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "this case against Peter Walker rests on flimsy circumstantial evidence and a story spun by people with hidden agendas. But the law isn't about tallies, it's about facts, and today, I'll prove that the facts clear my client's name." Reed leaned forward, his smirk widening as he propped an elbow on the table. "And where exactly did you study law, Miss Evans?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. Chloe didn't hesitate. "In the same place most lawyers begin, with the Constitution," she replied coolly. "For the past year, I've pored over every case precedent and statute relevant to this matter. I'm confident I can prove my client's innocence." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room, the air thick with skepticism. Reed wasn't done. "A year, you say?" he pressed, his voice rising with feigned astonishment. "Well, that's certainly more than enough time to become an expert." Chloe turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Mock me all you want, Mr. Reed," she said, "but my preparation will speak for itself." Before he could retort, she pivoted back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to start by addressing the financial discrepancies in the prosecution's evidence. If you'll allow me, I can explain why the allegations against Mr. Walker don't hold water." Morrison waved a hand impatiently. "Proceed," he grunted, settling back into his chair with a creak. Chloe stepped into the center of the room, her fingers flipping through her notes with the ease of someone far older than her 17 years. "The prosecution has pointed to a series of financial transactions. They claim tie my client to embezzlement," she said, her voice steady as she paced. "But a closer look reveals these transactions occurred during a time when Mr. Walker had no access to the company's accounts." Steele shut to her feet, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. "Objection, Your Honor," she snapped. "This is pure conjecture. Miss Evans can't substantiate these claims." Chloe didn't falter. "I'm glad you mentioned that, Miss Steele," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "If the court permits, I'd like to submit documentation proving Mr. Walker's lack of access during that period." She handed a neatly organized folder to the clerk, who passed it up to the judge. Morrison flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he scanned the evidence. Steele shot a glance at Reed, her confidence wavering. "This proves nothing," Reed argued, his voice rising as he gripped the edge of the table. "You're grasping at straws, Miss Evans." Chloe turned to him, her smile calm but piercing. "Straws that seem to be unraveling your case." "Mr. Reed," she said softly. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs again, the tension palpable. Steele rose once more, her voice sharp. "Your Honor." This line of questioning Morrison cut her off with a raised hand. "Miss Evans, continue," he said, his tone grudging but curious. What followed was a masterclass in legal precision. Chloe's voice grew stronger as she wove together precedents, cited rulings, and dismantled the prosecution's inconsistencies with surgical accuracy. Reed and Steele huddled together, their earlier smugness replaced by frantic whispers and furrowed brows. Peter Walker watched from his seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, a flicker of hope igniting in his weary eyes. Chloe concluded with a flourish, her voice ringing out. "The law demands more than assumptions, and shaky evidence demands proof. And today, I've shown this court that the prosecution has none." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Even Morrison seemed momentarily stunned, his stern features softening as he cleared his throat. "We'll take a recess before proceeding," he announced, banging his gavel, as the court adjourned. Steele turned to Reed, her expression hard. "Who is this girl?" she hissed. Reed shook his head, his jaw tight. "I don't know," he muttered, "but we need to find out." 2 weeks earlier, Chloe had been hunched over a sea of dusty law books in her cramped bedroom, the air thick with the scent of old paper and desperation. The room was a chaotic mess of textbooks teetered precariously on her desk. Loose papers littered the floor, and highlighters rolled beneath her creaky bed. She sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her brow furrowed as she traced the faded annotations in her brother Caleb's old books. His precise handwriting, once a source of pride for their family, now felt like a lifeline. Her pen scratched furiously across a notepad as she jotted down the implications of a ruling she'd uncovered, her mind racing with possibilities. The faint hum of the television drifted in from the living room, where her parents sat glued to yet another news report about Caleb's conviction. Each mention of his name drew a heavy sigh from her mother, a sound laced with grief and bitterness. Chloe's jaw tightened, her grip on the pen so fierce it nearly snapped. Her parents had given up, resigned to the injustice that had stolen her brother's future. But Chloe couldn't, not after everything she'd seen. The memory of Caleb's trial haunted her like a relentless ghost. He'd been the golden child, top grades, boundless ambition, destined for a career in law. But one fateful night at a bar had shattered that dream. Victor Grant, a wealthy businessman with a polished public persona, had accused Caleb of assault, spinning a tale of unprovoked violence that the jury swallowed whole. The public defender assigned to Caleb's case had been a disaster, fumbling through cross-examinations and missing every chance to poke holes in Grant's story. Chloe could still see the frustration blazing in Caleb's eyes as he watched his defense crumble, the flimsy evidence piling up against him. Grant's influence had tipped the scales, and Caleb was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, his future gone in an instant. The creak of her bedroom door jolted Chloe from her thoughts. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face etched with exhaustion and disapproval. "You're still at this?" she asked, her voice weary as she nodded toward the chaos of books and notes. Chloe looked up, her resolve hardening. "I have to be," she said quietly. "Someone has to fight for what's right." In that courtroom, as Chloe faced down the sneers and skepticism, she carried more than just Peter Walker's fate. She carried the weight of her brother's stolen justice, the sting of a system that favored power over truth. Every argument she made, every precedent she cited, was a strike against the arrogance of those who abused their authority. And as the judge and jury listened, wrapped and reeling, it became clear justice wasn't just a principle, it was a reckoning. For those who wielded power without care, the consequences could be swift and humbling, delivered by the unlikeliest of hands. The air in the room hung heavy with unspoken tension as Chloe locked eyes with her mother, her jaw set in a determined line. "Chloe, you're not a lawyer," her mother said, exasperation lacing every word. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's not going to rewrite what's already happened." Chloe didn't flinch, her gaze steady and unyielding. "I'm not trying to undo the past," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm fighting so no one else can inflict this kind of pain on someone I love." Her mother let out a long, weary sigh, the sound carrying the weight of years spent shielding her daughter from harsh realities. "You're still a child, Chloe. This isn't your battle to wage." Chloe's eyes flashed with defiance. "It is mine," she shot back, her voice rising with conviction, "because no one else is stepping up to fight it." Her mother's tone sharpened, cutting through the air like a blade. "And what happens when you stumble, when they laugh you out of that room, dismissing you as some naive little girl? Do you think they'll take you seriously? You'll humiliate yourself and this family." Chloe rose to her feet, her fists tightening at her sides, knuckles whitening as her emotions surged. "The only thing humiliating," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury, "is letting predators like Grant walk free, destroying lives without consequence. Caleb believed in justice, Mom. I'm not going to let him down." Her mother shook her head, a flicker of softness creeping into her stern expression. "You're too young to shoulder this burden," she said, almost pleading. "You should be dreaming about your future, not throwing yourself into a war you can't possibly win." Chloe didn't respond. Instead, she turned her back, her silence a wall of resolve, and sank into the scattered notes on her desk pages filled with her meticulous handwriting, a testament to her relentless determination. Later that evening, the atmosphere shifted as Lily Harris breezed into Chloe's room, a bag of chips dangling from her hand and a skeptical smirk tugging at her lips. She flopped onto the bed with a dramatic thud, her laid-back energy clashing with the storm brewing inside Chloe. Papers littered the floor around her, each one a piece of the puzzle she was desperately trying to solve. "So, you're really doing this?" Hub Lily asked, her tone teasing as she watched Chloe sift through the chaos. "You're actually going through with it?" "Yes," Chloe muttered, her focus unbroken, her fingers tracing the edges of a legal document. Lily crunched loudly on a chip, the sound grating against the quiet intensity of the room. "You know this is nuts, right? You're 17, Chloe. You can't just waltz into a courtroom and start throwing around arguments like you're some hotshot." From a TV drama, Chloe finally lifted her head, her eyes narrowing as irritation flared within her. "And why not?" she challenged. "Because I don't have a fancy degree framed on the wall? Because I'm not old enough for them to take me seriously? You think that stops people like Grant from twisting the system to their advantage?" Lily raised her hands in mock surrender, crumbs tumbling onto the bedspread. "Ho, easy there. I'm not saying you're wrong about Grant. Guys like him don't play fair. They'll squash you like a bug before you even open your mouth." Chloe's frustration boiled over, her voice cracking like a whip. "That's what everyone keeps telling me. You can't win, Chloe. You're too young, Chloe. But if I don't try, who will? Who's going to stand up for Caleb, for all the people like him who get crushed under the weight of this messed up system?" Lily's bravado wavered, her usual carefree mask slipping as she met her friend's fierce gaze. She hesitated, searching for words. "I'm just saying you're risking everything here. Your reputation, your future. What if it's not enough?" Chloe's expression softened, though her resolve remained a steel thread running through her core. "Then at least I'll know I gave it everything I had. I can't just sit here, Lily. Caleb didn't deserve what happened to him, and I won't let Grant keep doing this to other people." For a long moment, Lily studied her, the crunch of chips forgotten. Then she sighed, a reluctant grin breaking across her face. "You're absolutely insane. You know that." Chloe's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Yeah, I've heard that once or twice." Lily grabbed a pillow and lobbed it at her, the playful gesture cutting through the tension. "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes. "If you're dead set on this, I'm not letting you crash and burn solo. I'll help. Simeon's got to keep you from getting totally steamrolled." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the dining table where Chloe sat, surrounded by her fortress of papers. Her father nursed a steaming mug of coffee across from her, his silence a heavy presence in the room. His eyes flicked to the pile of notes, his face a mask of stoicism, though something unreadable flickered beneath the surface. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Your mother thinks you're setting yourself up to fall flat on your face." Chloe didn't look up, her pen scratching across a page. "And what do you think?" she asked, her tone neutral but edged with curiosity. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the ceramic clinking softly against the table as he set it down. "I think you're stubborn as hell," he said, a faint trace of pride in his words, "and brave. But I also think you don't realize how ruthless people like Grant can be. They'll chew you up and spit you out without a second thought." "I know exactly how ruthless they are," Chloe replied, finally meeting his gaze. "That's why I'm doing this." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "Chloe, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. But this isn't some school project you can wing. This is a courtroom. Real stakes, real consequences. You're putting everything on the line." "I know what I'm risking," she said, her voice steady, though her chest tightened with the weight of his words. "But if I don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. I can't live with that." Her father studied her, his weathered face softening as he absorbed her resolve. After a beat, he nodded, a small, reluctant gesture. "Just don't forget you've got us. We might not see eye to eye on this, but you're not out there alone." Chloe offered him a small, grateful smile, a rare crack in her armor. "I won't forget." Back in her room, she paused by her desk, her eyes catching on a small photo frame tucked amid the clutter. It was an old picture of her and Caleb, snapped during a family vacation years ago. The sun had painted golden streaks in his hair, and his wide, confident grin radiated a joy that now felt like a dagger in her chest. She lifted the frame, her fingers brushing the glass as memories flooded her, his laughter echoing across the beach. The way he'd always believed the world could be fair. That belief had been stolen from him, crushed under the heel of someone like Grant. The world had underestimated Caleb, just as it was underestimating her now. But she'd show them. She'd make them see. Days later, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. A low hum of voices rippling through the gallery. The sharp crack of Judge Morrison's gavel sliced through the noise, demanding silence as the heavy wooden doors groaned open. A man strode in, his tailored gray suit impeccable, his posture exuding a quiet, commanding authority. Every step echoed with purpose, drawing every eye in the room. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and measured. "My apologies for the interruption. I'm Daniel Hayes, representative of the Bar Association, here to address a matter of utmost urgency regarding this trial." Chloe stiffened at the defendant's table, her pulse quickening as whispers erupted around her. Across the room, Rhonda Steele's lips curled into a smug, predatory smirk, while Marcus Reed leaned back in his chair, his amusement plain as day. Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses, peering down at the newcomer. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his tone calm but edged with curiosity, "what brings you barging into my courtroom uninvited?" Hayes inclined his head respectfully, though his eyes gleamed with intent. "It has come to the Bar Association's attention that Miss Chloe Evans, currently acting as counsel for the defendant, is an unlicensed individual with no formal legal training. Her presence here poses serious ethical and procedural questions that cannot be ignored." The words detonated like a grenade, the room erupting into a chorus of gasps and murmurs. Chloe's heart thudded against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay composed even as the ground seemed to shift beneath her. Rhonda Steele rose gracefully, her movements deliberate, her voice dripping with calculated disdain. "Your Honor, I must concur with Mr. Hayes. Permitting a minor with no credentials to serve as counsel undermines the very foundation of this court's integrity. Miss Evans may be eager, but eagerness is no substitute for expertise." Marcus Reed chuckled darkly, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Fair? She's a teenager playing dress-up in a lawyer's shoes. How's that fair to anyone?" Chloe surged to her feet, her voice ringing out clear and unshaken. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't about me. It's about ensuring my client gets a fair shot at justice. Fairness," she said, turning to face Reed head-on, "is giving someone a defense when the rest of the world has already condemned them. Mr. Walker deserves that, and I'm here to deliver it." Judge Morrison raised a hand, silencing the brewing storm. "Miss Evans," he said, his tone stern, "Mr. Hayes has raised a legitimate issue. This court is bound by the law, and legal representation demands certification. Why should I bend those rules for you?" Chloe stepped forward, her chin high, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Because my client deserves someone who believes he's innocent, who's poured months into this case, studying every shred of evidence, every precedent, every loophole. If you let me continue, I'll prove I'm capable, not with a diploma, but with results." Hayes crossed his arms, his skepticism a tangible force. "Self-study doesn't make you a lawyer. Miss Evans, the law isn't a playground for amateurs." Chloe's eyes blazed as she met his stare. "It's not a game to meets justice. And if the system shuts me out because I don't have the right title, then maybe the system's the one that's broken." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Steele broke the quiet, her voice icy and patronizing. "Your Honor, this court can't be a theater for childish stunts. If we let Miss Evans proceed, what's next? Anyone with a library card can waltz in and call themselves counsel." Chloe's fists clenched, but she kept her composure. "This isn't about precedent, it's about right and wrong. The law should protect the innocent, not cloak the powerful. My client doesn't have the resources for a big-shot attorney, so here I am." Hayes stepped closer to the bench, his tone sharpening. "Your Honor, passion is admirable, but it doesn't override the standards that hold this court together. Rules exist for a reason." Judge Morrison raised a hand, his voice a thunderclap. "Enough. I've heard you all. Miss Evans, I'll allow you to proceed for now. But mark my words, if you falter or waste this court's time, I'll pull the plug without hesitation. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Chloe said, relief washing over her like a tide. Though her face remained a mask of determination, Hayes' jaw tightened, his silence a storm brewing, while Steele's eyes narrowed, her mind clearly already spinning new strategies. "If Miss Evans continues," Steele added smoothly, "I insist her every move be held to the highest scrutiny." "Noted," Morrison replied, his tone clipped. "Miss Evans, you have the floor. Tread carefully." As the courtroom settled, Chloe drew a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. Hayes retreated to the gallery, his gaze a laser fixed on her. Steele and Reed exchanged hushed words, their smirks signaling they were far from finished. Chloe had clawed her way to this moment, but the weight of the system bore down harder with every step, a reminder that justice was a treacherous path and one she'd have to carve herself. During the recess, Chloe sat hunched over her notes at the defendant's table, the faint hum of the courthouse buzzing around her. Footsteps approached, deliberate and measured, and she looked up to find Hayes looming nearby. His voice a low, cutting murmur. "You might have swayed the judge for now, but don't get cozy. The law's not your friend and neither am I." Chloe met his stare, unflinching. "Good," she said, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I'd hate for it to be easy." Hayes straightened, his expression hardening into something cold and unyielding, before turning on his heel and vanishing into the crowd. The gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the break, and Chloe rose to her feet, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Your Honor," she began, stepping into the spotlight she'd fought so hard to claim. "Let's talk about justice and what happens when power forgets its purpose." The room held its breath, and in that moment, Chloe felt the weight of Caleb's memory, her family's doubts, and the system's scorn. But she also felt the fire within her, burning brighter than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was a cavernous space, its high ceilings amplifying every whisper and shuffle as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Chloe Evans sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her fingers brushing nervously against the edges of her meticulously organized notes. The faint tremble in her hands betrayed the storm brewing within here, a relentless tide of doubt, fear, and determination crashing against the fragile dam of her composure. She could still hear Judge Morrison's stern warning from earlier that morning, his voice clipped and heavy with authority, ringing in her ears like a metronome of impending doom. "Miss Evans, this court will not tolerate wasted time." The words gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the stakes, but she refused to let them paralyze her. Across the room, the prosecution team exuded an unshakable air of certainty. Miranda Steele, with her sharp features and sharper tongue, leaned over to murmur something to her co-counsel, Marcus Reed. Their exchanged glances carried the weight of a shared secret, a quiet confidence that seemed to mock Chloe's every move. Marcus nodded subtly, his dark eyes glinting with the kind of self-assuredness that comes from years of bending the system to their will. The two of them were a formidable pair, Steele with her icy precision, Reed with his calculated restraint, and Chloe felt the pressure of their presence, like a physical force pressing down on her chest. The prosecution's case rested on a flimsy foundation, a story woven from threads of speculation rather than the sturdy fabric of evidence. Chloe had spotted the cracks in their timeline from the start, and she'd seized the chance to expose them. "If I may, Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the room's low hum, "I'd like to address the inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative." Before she could finish her thought, Steele shot to her feet, her objections slicing through the air like a blade. "Miss Evans is attempting to distract the court from the facts," she snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. Chloe pivoted toward Judge Morrison, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing with resolve. "I am addressing the facts, Your Honor. If the prosecution can't defend their timeline, that's their failing, not mine." Morrison's lips pressed into a thin line, his patience visibly fraying, but he waved a hand. "Overruled. Miss Evans, proceed." Steele's gaze narrowed into slits, her frustration palpable, but Chloe pressed forward undeterred. She laid out the prosecution's flaws with surgical precision, dates that didn't align, witnesses whose stories clashed, evidence that crumbled under scrutiny. As she spoke, she caught sight of Hay, the bailiff, watching her from his post near the door. His face was an unreadable mask, but his intense stare sent a shiver down her spine. Was he judging her, admiring her? She couldn't tell, and the uncertainty only fueled her resolve. The session broke for a brief recess, and Chloe sank into her chair, the weight of the day settling into her bones. Her notes blurred before her eyes as she flipped through them, her mind racing to stitch together the next thread of her defense. The courtroom buzzed with the murmurs of spectators and the rustle of papers, a restless energy that mirrored her own. Then, a sudden creak shattered the monotony. Heavy oak doors at the back of the room groaned open, and a small figure burst inside. Ethan, her younger brother, no more than 10 years old, darted down the aisle, his sneakers squeaking against the gleaming hardwood floor. His small hands clutched an envelope, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. "Chloe," he gasped, skidding to a halt beside her. His wide, earnest eyes shimmered with urgency, his chest heaving from the sprint. Startled, Chloe whispered his name, her heart lurching at the sight of him. "You forgot this," he said, thrusting the envelope toward her, his voice breathless but resolute. "What is this?" she asked, keeping her tone hushed as she took it from him. "It's from Caleb," Ethan replied, louder than she'd have liked, drawing curious stares from around the room. The sharp bang of Judge Morrison's gavel silenced the growing whispers. "Order," he barked, his voice a thunderclap. "Who is this child, and why is he disrupting my courtroom?" Chloe rose swiftly, resting a steadying hand on Ethan's trembling shoulder. "Your Honor, this is my brother, Ethan. I wasn't expecting him, but he's brought something important." Steele leaped up, a smug grin curling her lips. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We can't allow personal dramatics to derail these proceedings." Chloe's temper flared, but she kept her voice even. "It's not dramatics. If you'd give me a moment, I can explain." Morrison's frown deepened, his patience hanging by a thread. "Miss Evans, this isn't a family reunion. Whatever personal business you have, it doesn't belong here." Ethan tugged at her sleeve, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Just read it, Chloe." "Caleb said it's important." She hesitated, the envelope suddenly feeling like a lead weight in her hands. Steele watched her with thinly veiled contempt, her posture radiating triumph. Taking a steadying breath, Chloe tore it open, unfolding the single sheet inside. Caleb's familiar handwriting greeted her, neat, deliberate, a lifeline in the chaos. "Chloe, if you're reading this, you're in the fight I always knew you'd take on. I know it's tougher than you let on. The system doesn't bend for people like us, the ones without money or connections. But you've got something they can't touch, grit. You don't back down, and that's your strength. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who's been crushed by people like Grant. Everyone who deserves a voice. You can do this. I've always believed in you." Her throat tightened as she read, the words wrapping around her heart like a tether pulling her back from the edge. The courtroom's clamor faded, replaced by the echo of Caleb's voice in her mind, steady, unwavering. The brother who'd always been her anchor. For a moment, she was frozen, the letter trembling in her grasp. "Miss Evans," Morrison's sharp tone jolted her back to reality. "Care to tell us what's so captivating?" She straightened, clutching the paper like a shield. "Your Honor, it's a letter from my brother, Caleb Evans. It's not tied to the case directly, but it's why I'm here." Steele let out a derisive scoff. "And why should that matter to this court?" "We're not here for your sentimental outbursts." Chloe turned to her, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside. "It matters because people like Caleb are why the law exists to protect the innocent, to demand fairness, to give a voice to the voiceless." Morrison leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Miss Evans, this court runs on evidence, not feelings. Do you have anything else to add?" She glanced down at the letter, Caleb's words anchoring her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "This isn't just emotion, it's purpose. The law isn't a cold machine. It's a promise to seek justice, to uphold truth, to defend those who can't defend themselves. That's what I'm here to do." Steele opened her mouth to retort, but Morrison silenced her with a raised hand. "Enough, Miss Evans. If you're done, let's move on. No more interruptions." Chloe nodded, her resolve hardening. "Yes, Your Honor." Ethan tugged at her sleeve again, his small voice trembling with hope. "You're gonna win, right?" She knelt beside him, her tone soft but ironclad. "I'm gonna give it everything I've got. Go sit with Lily, okay?" He flashed a quick nod and scampered off to the gallery, where Lily Harris, a weary woman with a kind smile and a knack for wrangling chaos, waved him over with a reassuring grin. The proceedings resumed, but something had shifted in Chloe. Caleb's letter burned in her mind, a ember of purpose flaring into a flame. She knew the deck was stacked against her. The system wasn't built for people like her or Caleb, the ones who scraped by on determination alone. But that was exactly why she fought. When Steele launched into her next argument, Chloe listened with razor-sharp focus, her earlier doubts replaced by a steely clarity. Her turn came, and she rose, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case leans on guesswork and shaky evidence. The law demands more. It demands proof beyond doubt, and I'm here to show that doubt is undeniable." Her words flowed like a river, each point bolstered by hours of painstaking research. Steele and Reed exchanged uneasy looks, their confidence faltering as Chloe tore their narrative apart, brick by crumbling brick. By the session's end, she'd wrested control of the room, her determination a blazing beacon. Caleb's letter had rekindled her fire, but she knew the war wasn't won. The system would resist her every step, a towering Goliath to her David. If she wanted justice, she'd have to fight with every ounce of her being smarter, fiercer, unrelenting. The air thickened as Victor Grant took the witness stand, his tailored suit a silent boast of power and privilege. He moved with the ease of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, his smug confidence radiating like heat from a furnace. Chloe's hands tightened on the table's edge, her nails digging into the wood as she tracked his every move. This was the man who'd shattered Caleb's life, who'd wielded his influence like a sledgehammer to crush anyone who dared defy him. Grant adjusted the microphone with a practiced hand, offering the room a polished smile before flicking his gaze to Chloe. The faint smirk tugging at his lips was a taunt, a dare she felt in her bones. "Mr. Grant," Miranda Steele began, her voice smooth as silk as she rose, "thank you for being here. Could you recount your interactions with the defendant, Peter Walker?" Grant nodded, his tone slick with Fox professionalism. "Certainly. Mr. Walker was a financial analyst at my company. He started out competent enough, but over time, irregularities in our accounts surfaced, tracing back to him." Steele tilted her head, prompting him further. "And you reported these issues immediately?" Grant's response was swift, unwavering. "Absolutely. I run a tight ship. Embezzlement isn't something I tolerate." Steele turned to the jury, her smile calculated. "So, in your expert opinion, Mr. Walker's actions were intentional?" Grant's eyes flicked to Chloe, his words a sharpened blade. Without a doubt, the certainty in his voice was meant to box her in, to leave no room for counterattack. Chloe drew a slow breath, steadying the storm within her. "Your witness," Steele said, gesturing to her with a flourish. Chloe stood, her pulse hammering, but her face a mask of calm. She approached the stand, locking eyes with Grant, refusing to blink. "Mr. Grant," she began, her voice clear and firm, "you allege Peter Walker embezzled funds. Can you provide specific evidence tying him to these actions?" Grant's smirk widened, his confidence unshaken. "The financial records speak for themselves." She stepped closer, undeterred. "Yet those records only show discrepancies, not definitive proof linking Mr. Walker to misconduct. Couldn't those irregularities have other causes?" Grant chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "Miss Evans, I admire your zeal, but this isn't about theories. The evidence is plain." Chloe pressed forward, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "You mean the evidence your company supplied? Evidence from an internal audit you oversaw?" His smile flickered. "Just for a heartbeat, that's right. Our auditors are top tier." She tilted her head, her tone unrelenting, but not impartial. "Wouldn't controlling the audit's outcome raise questions about bias?" Grant's composure held, but a shadow crossed his ice, a crack in his armor. Chloe seized it, her mind racing as she dismantled his testimony. This wasn't just about Peter Walker. It was about the cost of unchecked power, the wreckage left by men like Grant who twisted justice for their gain. The lesson burned in her chest. Power without accountability was a poison, and she'd fight to her last breath to expose it. The courtroom thrummed with a restless energy as Victor Grant sat rigid on the witness stand, his tailored suit clinging to him like a second skin. His jaw clenched tight, betraying the unease simmering beneath his polished exterior. Across from him, Chloe Evans stood poised, her sharp gaze slicing through the haze of tension that hung heavy in the air. The wooden floors creaked faintly under her measured steps as she paced, her heels clicking with a rhythm that echoed purpose. She adjusted her notes with trembling fingersnip from fear, but from the fire coursing through her veins, this wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. "Your Honor," came the sudden bark of Miranda Steele, Grant's attorney, her voice slicing through the room like a whip. She shot up from her seat, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to mirror the strain in her expression. Miss Evans is badgering the witness with relentless aggression. Her objection rang out, sharp and desperate, as if she could sense the ground shifting beneath her client's feet. Judge Morrison, perched high on his bench, leaned forward slightly, his silver hair catching the dim light of the courtroom. His weathered face remained impassive, though a flicker of curiosity danced in his eyes. "Overruled," he said, his voice steady as granite. "Miss Evans, you may proceed." Chloe dipped her head in a curt nod, a silent thank you to the judge. Though her mind churned with the weight of the moment, she turned her attention back to Grant, her hazel eyes narrowing as she locked onto him. "Mr. Grant," she began, her tone crisp and deliberate. "Earlier you testified that integrity is the very foundation of your company. You built your reputation on it, didn't you? That's what you said, correct?" Grant shifted in his seat, his broad shoulders stiffening as he forced a nod. "Absolutely," he replied, but there was a brittleness to his voice now, a crack in the armor of his confidence. His fingers drummed lightly against the armrest, a nervous tick he couldn't quite suppress. He'd walked into this courtroom expecting to dominate, but Chloe's presence was a storm he hadn't anticipated. "Then let's dig a little deeper," Chloe pressed, stepping closer to the stand. Her voice cut through the stillness like a blade honed by years of suppressed fury. "How do you account for the allegations of financial misconduct leveled against you? By former employees? People who worked under you, trusted you, claims that you buried evidence and twisted documents to shield your company's pristine image." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and accusing. Grant's posture stiffened further, his lips pressing into a thin, defiant line. "Those allegations are nonsense," he snapped, his tone laced with a defensive edge that hadn't been there before. "Disgruntled ex-employees will say anything to smear me. They're bitter, grasping at straws." But his eyes darted to the side, avoiding Chloe's unrelenting stare, and the jury noticed. One juror, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, scribbled something in her notebook, her brow furrowing. Chloe tilted her head, her expression hardening as she sensed the fracture in his facade. "So you're telling us you've never suppressed evidence, never fabricated a single document to protect your empire?" Her voice dipped lower, each word deliberate, as if she were peeling back layers of his carefully constructed lie. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the memory of her brother Caleb fueling her resolve. Grant leaned back slightly, his confident mask slipping just enough to reveal the flicker of panic beneath. "That's not what this case is about, Miss Evans," he said, his voice tight, deflecting her assault with a practiced ease that didn't quite land. "No, it's not," Chloe shot back, her tone rising just enough to seize the jury's attention. The room seemed to shrink around her words, every eye now fixed on her. "But it is about your credibility as a witness. If you've tampered with the truth before, you've bent it to suit your need show. Can this court trust a single piece of evidence you've laid against Mr. Walker?" Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms as she fought to keep her composure. The sting grounded her, kept her sharp. Grant's lips tightened into a grimace, his silence stretching taut across the room like a wire ready to snap. The gallery murmured softly, a ripple of unease spreading through the onlookers. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under him, and then, with a slow, deliberate lean forward, he broke the quiet. "You're just like your brother," he said, his voice low and venomous, each syllable dripping with intent. The words struck Chloe like a physical blow, a sucker punch she hadn't seen coming. The air in the courtroom thickened, the tension coiling tighter as whispers erupted from the gallery. Chloe's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribcage. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck, the raw ache of Caleb's memory clawing at her insides. Her nails dug deeper into her skin, the pain a lifeline to her focus. "What was that, Mr. Grant?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm, a stillness that masked the storm raging within. Grant leaned forward further, his smirk twisting into something cruel. "Your brother Colb, wasn't it? He tried to play the hero too. Look where that got him." His words were a dagger, aimed straight at her heart, and he relished the flicker of pain he saw in her eyes. Steele surged to her feet again, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Your Honor, I object. This line of questioning is irrelevant and inflammatory." Her voice trembled with urgency, her loyalty to Grant driving her to shield him from the unraveling chaos. Chloe cut in before the judge could respond, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Withdrawn," she said, refusing to let Grant's taunt derail her. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance until she could see the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "Let's stay on track, shall we? You claim you had no motive to target Mr. Walker. Is that right?" "That's right," Grant replied, his smirk creeping back as he regained a sliver of his footing. He straightened in his seat, brushing an imaginary speck from his sleeve as if to dismiss her entirely. "That explained the timing," Chloe countered, her voice sharpening like a blade drawn from its sheath. "The discrepancies you pointed out in Mr. Walker's work those only came up after he raised concerns about your company's shady handling of client funds. Isn't it true that his accusations threatened to crack open your reputation? That he was a loose end you needed to tie up?" She leaned in slightly, her presence commanding, unyielding. Grant's composure faltered, his smirk fading as his fingers gripped the armrests tighter. "That's ridiculous," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction, his voice wavering just enough to betray him. "Is it?" Chloe pressed, her tone unrelenting. "Or is it just convenient? A neat little way to silence someone who dared to call out your corruption." The room seemed to hold its breath, every juror leaning forward, caught in the gravity of her accusation. Steele leapt up again, her voice cracking through the tension like a gunshot. "Objection, speculation." Her eyes flashed with frustration, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if anchoring herself against Chloe's onslaught. "Sustained," Judge Morrison said, though his gaze lingered on Chloe, a spark of intrigue in his expression. He adjusted his glasses, peering down at the scene unfolding before him. Chloe didn't miss a beat. She pivoted smoothly, her voice steady as she delivered her final blow. "One last question, Mr. Grant. Do you have any direct evidence beyond the internal reports you control that proves Mr. Walker embezzled funds?" Her words hung in the air, a challenge he couldn't ignore. Grant hesitated, his eyes flickering to Steele for a fraction of a second. The pause stretched, heavy and damning, before he answered. "The evidence we've provided is sufficient," he said, but his voice was hollow, the confidence drained from it. "In other words, no," Chloe said, turning to face the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution's key witness can't produce a shred of independent evidence to back his claims. His testimony rests entirely on documents he shaped, prepared, and presented himself. I ask the court to consider this when evaluating the prosecution's case. Consider what it means when power is abused to bury the truth." Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of the justice she sought. Judge Morrison nodded, scribbling a note on his pad. "Duly noted," he said, his tone measured. "Mr. Grant, you may step down." Grant rose from the stand, his movements stiff and mechanical, as he returned to his seat. His face was a storm of irritation and unease, his polished veneer cracking under the pressure. Steele leaned in close, whispering urgently in his ear, her hands gesturing sharply as she tried to salvage their crumbling strategy. Chloe watched them from the defense table, her hands still trembling as she gathered her notes. She'd shaken him, she could feel it, but the fight was far from over. Men like Grant didn't fall easily. Their connections were a web spun deep into the system, and she knew it. The courtroom doors creaked open, pulling every gaze toward the back of the room. A man stepped inside, his shoulders hunched under an invisible burden, his steps slow but resolute. Chloe's breath hitched as she recognized him. Henry Willis, a former employee of Grant's, his face etched with the weariness of a man who'd carried secrets too long. He clutched a USB drive in his weathered hand, holding it up like a beacon. "Your Honor," Steele said, shooting to her feet with a scowl, this is highly irregular." Her voice was a mixture of indignation and panic, her composure fraying at the edges. Willis ignored her, his gaze fixed on the judge. "I have evidence," he said, his voice steady despite the quiver in his hands. "It proves Mr. Grant has been lying this whole time." The courtroom erupted in a chorus of gasps and murmurs, the tension spiking to a fever pitch. Chloe's eyes locked onto the USB drive, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. This could be the fracture she'd been clawing for, the piece that could topple Grant's house of cards. Willis approached the bench, his boots scuffing against the floor, each step a testament to the courage it took to stand there. He avoided Grant's searing glare, focusing instead on Judge Morrison, who frowned but motioned for him to hand over the drive. "Mr. Willis," Morrison said, his voice grave, "this court takes such claims seriously. We'll ensure this is reviewed immediately." Willis nodded, passing the drive to the bailiff, who whisked it away to an adjacent room for analysis. "This is absurd," Grant muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear, his voice dripping with disdain. He crossed his arms, his posture defiant, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. Chloe didn't let the moment slip. "What's absurd, Mr. Grant, is your refusal to face the truth," she said, her tone cutting through his bravado. He shot her a look of pure venom, but before he could fire back, the bailiff returned, a laptop cradled in his arms. "Your Honor," the bailiff announced, "the video file is intact and untampered with." "Play it," Morrison ordered, leaning forward as the courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The grainy footage flickered to life on a screen, revealing the dim interior of a bar. Caleb Evans stepped into the frame, his broad shoulders relaxed, his demeanor calm as he exchanged brief words with Grant, who sat at a table flanked by a handful of associates. The air grew thick with anticipation as Caleb turned to leave, only for Grant to lurch to his feet, grabbing Caleb's arm and shoving him hard. The courtroom collectively held its breath as the scene unfolded. Caleb raised his hands, palms out, a clear plea for peace, but Grant swung first, his fist connecting with a sickening thud. A brief scuffle ensued, the footage jerking chaotically before cutting off, leaving no doubt who'd ignited the violence. Silence blanketed the room, thick and suffocating, before the murmurs swelled into a low roar. Steele was on her feet in an instant, her voice piercing the chaos. "Your Honor, this footage is irrelevant. It pertains to a prior matter and has no bearing on Peter Walker's alleged embezzlement." Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the desperation she tried to mask. Chloe shot up, her voice ringing with conviction. "Your Honor, this footage is critical. It proves Mr. Grant has a pattern of twisting the truth to shield himself. If he lied about my brother, how can we trust a word he said about Mr. Walker?" Her chest heaved, the memory of Caleb's fight and his fall fueling her every word. Grant surged to his feet, his composure shattering. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed, his face flushed with rage. Caleb Evans was violent, unstable. Morrison's gavel crashed down like a thunderclap, silencing the room. "Mr. Grant, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt." His voice boomed, authoritative and unyielding. Grant sank back into his seat, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with fury. The judge turned to Steele, his expression stern. "Miss Steele, do you have a response to the defense's claim that this video undermines your witness's credibility?" Steele straightened, her face a mask of professionalism despite the sweat glistening at her temples. "Your Honor, while the footage may raise questions about Mr. Grant's past actions, it doesn't absolve Peter Walker of the charges against him. The prosecution's evidence stands firm." Chloe stepped forward, her tone razor-sharp. "The prosecution's evidence hinges entirely on Mr. Grant's word. If he's a proven liar, their case collapses like a house of cards." She could feel the tide shifting, the weight of justice tilting in her favor, however slightly. Morrison tapped his gavel lightly, his brow furrowed in thought. "Miss Steele, I'll give you time to respond to this new evidence. We'll recess for 30 minutes. The courtroom buzzed as he rose, the sound of his robes rustling fading into the clamor of voices. During the break, Chloe sat at the defense table, her notes spread before her like a battlefield map. Henry Willis approached, his steps tentative, his voice hushed. "I hope that video was enough," he said, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. Chloe looked up, her expression a blend of gratitude and steely resolve. It's a start, Henry. But they won't go down without a fight. Men like Granthey thrive on power, and they'll claw at anything to keep it. She paused, her gaze softening. Thank you. I know what this cost you. Willis nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips before he shuffled away. His shoulders still bowed under the weight of his choice. Chloe turned back to her notes, her mind racing. The video was a crack in Grant's armor, but she needed more to bring him down to expose the rot of corruption that men like him spread unchecked. When the court reconvened, Steele stood with a folder in hand, her expression unreadable, though her eyes glinted with a quiet triumph. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth and controlled. While the defense has been busy attacking my witness, the prosecution has uncovered additional evidence that bolsters our case against Peter Walker. She handed the folder to the clerk, who passed it to Morrison. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow creasing deeper with each turn. Explain, he said. His tone clipped. These are internal company emails, Steele continued, her voice steady as she laid out her trap. They're between Peter Walker and an accomplice, detailing their scheme to siphon funds from the company. The language is clear, explicit. There's no room for misinterpretation. She glanced at Chloe, a flicker of challenge in her eyes. Chloe's heart plummeted as the documents landed in front of her. She scanned them quickly, her stomach twisting into knots. The emails were damning time-stamped, professionally formatted, their words painting a vivid picture of deceit. Her hands shook as she gripped the pages, but she forced her voice to remain firm. This is fabricated, she said, meeting Steele's gaze head-on. These are lies dressed up as truth. Steele raised an eyebrow, her tone cool and cutting. And what proof do you have of that? Miss Evans, these emails speak for themselves. Chloe's mind raced, her pulse hammering in her ears. She could feel the weight of the courtroom pressing in, the jury's eyes boring into her. The emails were a masterstroke, a counterpunch she hadn't anticipated. But she knew Grant knew the depths of his ruthlessness. This was his game, and she'd have to play it smarter, harder, to win. Justice wasn't just about truth. It was about exposing the consequences of power wielded without conscience. And she wouldn't stop until that lesson was carved into the bones of this case. The courtroom was a cavern of tension, its wooden walls seeming to pulse with the weight of the moment. Chloe Evans sat at the defense table, her knuckles whitening as she clutched a pen, her sharp eyes darting toward Miranda Steele. Across the room, Steele leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk. She'd just dropped a bombshell mails, she claimed, sourced from a reliable insider at Victor Grant's company. Chloe's pulse quickened, her mind racing with suspicion. A source you won't name, I assume, she shot back, her voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. Steele's smile deepened, a flicker of amusement dancing in her cool, gray eyes. Confidentiality is the shield that guards whistleblowers, she replied smoothly, her tone dripping with assurance. But rest assured, these emails have been thoroughly vetted for authenticity. Her words hung there, heavy and deliberate, as if daring anyone to challenge her. Chloe's stomach twisted. She could feel the calculation behind Steele's every syllable. Turning to the judge, she squared her shoulders, her voice firm despite the tremor she fought to suppress. Your Honor, I request an immediate forensic analysis of these documents. If they're genuine, they'll hold up under scrutiny. If not, it exposes just how far Mr. Grant and his allies will stretch to bend this court to their will. Judge Morrison, a stern figure perched high above the fray, gave a slow nod, his weathered face unreadable. Miss Steele, the defense's request is reasonable. This court will recess until an independent analysis can be completed. His gavel fell with a resounding crack, and the room exhaled as people shuffled out, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of restless bees. Chloe gathered her papers, her hands trembling faintly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline surging through her veins. Steele's move had been a masterstroke, a chess play designed to unnerve her, and it had worked. Almost. As the crowd thinned, Henry Willis approached, his tall frame looming beside her. His face was pale, his brow creased with worry, a stark contrast to the confident colleague she'd known for years. They're escalating, he said, his voice low and gravelly. as if the words scraped against his throat. If those emails are fake, it means they're desperate. But it also means they won't stop. Chloe met his gaze, her jaw tightening as resolve solidified within her. Then we won't stop either, she replied, her tone a steel thread woven with defiance. She left the courtroom, the weight of the fight pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden, each step echoing with the realization that Steele and Grant were willing to drag this battle into the darkest corners imaginable. Days later, the courtroom hummed with anticipation, a restless energy crackling through the air as the forensic analyst stepped forward. He carried a thick report, its pages bristling with data, and all eyes swiveled toward Judge Morrison. Chloe sat rigid, her fingers digging into the pen until it felt like an extension of her hand. While Steele maintained her unshakable composure, her posture relaxed yet commanding. The analyst cleared his throat, his voice steady as he addressed the bench. Your Honor, we've conducted an exhaustive review of the emails submitted by the prosecution. Our findings reveal clear evidence of digital tampering, altered timestamps, manipulated metadata. These documents are not authentic. A ripple of murmurs surged through the room, a wave of shock and disbelief. Chloe let out a slow breath, relief flooding her chest like cool water after a drought. Though she knew this was merely a fleeting reprieve, Steele, however, didn't so much as blink. She rose gracefully, her voice calm and measured as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, while the defense may seize on this to question these specific emails, they do not erase the mountain of evidence against Mr. Walker. This feels like a desperate distraction. Chloe shot to her feet, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and vindication. A distraction. The prosecution paraded fabricated evidence before this court. That undermines every shred of credibility they've claimed. Judge Morrison raised a hand, his stern gesture slicing through the rising tension. Enough. Miss Steele, the use of doctored documents is a grave matter. Do you have an explanation? Steele paused, a rare flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she responded. The prosecution relied on information from an anonymous whistleblower within the company. We had no reason to suspect its validity, Chloe muttered under her breath. Convenient. Before raising her voice to the court, Your Honor, this fabricated evidence taints the prosecution's entire case. I move to dismiss the charges against my client. Morrison's gaze shifted between the two women, his expression a mask of deliberation. The motion to dismiss is denied for now. However, the court will mandate a deeper investigation into the origins of these documents. We proceed with caution. As the recess was called, Chloe packed her notes, her mind a whirlwind of strategies and questions. She'd scored a small victory, a crack in Grant's armor. But the prosecution's audacity revealed a chilling truth. They'd stop at nothing to win. Outside the courtroom, Henry Willis caught her arm, his face drained of color, his eyes darting nervously. Miss Evans, he said, motioning her aside. She followed, her voice hushed. What is it, Henry? He hesitated, then leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. Those emails, they're not the first. Chloe's brow furrowed, unease prickling her skin. What do you mean? Willis swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. Grant's done this before. Back when I worked for him, he had me forge documents, anything to crush whistleblowers, rivals, anyone who threatened his empire. We'd weave lies so tight they'd choke the truth. Chloe's stomach churned, a sickening mix of disgust and determination roiling within her. Why tell me now? She demanded. Willis's hands shook as he met her gaze. Because I'm done shielding him. But you need to know Grant doesn't lose. If he sees you as a threat, he'll come for you. Her eyes hardened, glinting with resolve. Let him try. If we expose this, he'll have nowhere left to run. The lesson was clear. Power, when abused, bred corruption, but justice demanded relentless pursuit of the truth. That evening, Chloe retreated to Lily's cramped apartment, her temporary war room. Case files and notes sprawled across the small table, a chaotic map of her fight. She replayed the day's events in her mind, her pen scratching furiously as she drafted arguments. Her phone buzzed on unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Miss Evans, a familiar voice drawled, smooth and menacing. Victor Grant. Her grip tightened, nails digging into her palm. What do you want? She snapped. Just offering some advice. Grant said, his tone deceptively casual. Walk away. You're wading into waters too deep, and the further you swim, the more dangerous it gets. Her voice sharpened, cutting through his calm. Is that a threat? He chuckled, a dark, velvety sound. Call it a warning. People like me don't lose. Anger flared in her chest, hot and fierce. You don't scare me, Grant. Your lies are crumbling, and when they're gone, you'll be left naked. Another laugh. Colder this time. We'll see. The line went dead. Chloe set the phone down, her hands trembling it from fear. But from the fire now blazing within her, Lily emerged from the kitchen. Her round face creased with concern. Was that who I think it was? Chloe nodded, her jaw tight. Grant, he's trying to intimidate me. Lily's frown deepened, her voice soft but firm. You need to be careful, Chloe. He's not bluffing, I know, Chloe replied, her tone steady despite the unease gnawing at her. But I'm not backing down, not now. The next morning, Chloe met Henry Willis at a quiet diner. The scent of coffee and grease thick in the air. He slid a folder across the table, his fingers lingering as if reluctant to let it go. What's this? She asked, flipping it open. Everything I've got on Grant's operations, he said, his voice low. Fake documents, payoffs, cover-ups. It's not enough to bury him completely, but it's a start. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the pad, just evidence of a sprawling web of deceit. This is huge. She breathed. But we need to go bigger. We need someone with a voice to blast this wide open. Willis hesitated, his eyes shadowed with doubt. You're thinking of going public? She nodded. Firm and unshaken. Sarah Green, investigative journalist. If we get this to her, she can expose Grant to the world. His unease deepened, but she pressed on. I'm sure, Henry. Grant's already trying to scare me off. That means we're close. Later, Chloe and Willis met Sarah Green at a tucked-away cafe, the folder of evidence heavy in her hands. Sarah's sharp eyes scanned the room before settling on Chloe. Miss Evans, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for meeting us, Chloe replied, setting the folder down. This is everything we have on Victor Grant. Fabricated evidence, fraud, intimidation. He's destroyed lives, including my brother's. Sarah flipped through the documents, her expression hardening with each page. This is explosive, she said after a long pause. If it holds up, we're talking a major scandal. It's real, Chloe insisted. But we need you to make sure the world sees it. Sarah nodded, her resolve mirroring Chloe's. Leave it with me. I'll verify every detail. If this is solid, we'll bring him down. When Sarah's article hit the next morning, the world tilted. Headlines screamed across news outlets and social media. Unmasking corruption. Victor Grant's dark empire. The piece laid bare a tapestry of lease-forged evidence, bribed officials, ruined lives to protect Grant's power. Protests erupted outside his headquarters, voices roaring for justice. Public officials scrambled to distance themselves, their statements dripping with hollow platitudes. News anchors dissected Sarah's findings, their tones a mix of shock and righteous fury. Chloe read the article, her heart thundering with triumph and dread. This was the breakthrough she'd clawed for. But it came with a stark truth. Exposing corruption invited retribution. Grant's empire was cracking, but the fight was far from over. Justice, she realized, wasn't just a verdict. It was a war against those who wielded power without conscience. A war she'd fight to the end. The world seemed to spin off its axis as Victor Grant's dark secrets unraveled. Each revelation a seismic jolt that rippled through the lives of those determined to bring him down. Late that afternoon, as shadows stretched long across the city, Chloe perched on the edge of a worn couch in Lily's cluttered apartment, her fingers tracing the edges of a towering stack of documents. Across from her sat Willis, his brow creased with concentration, his dark eyes flicking over the papers like a hunter tracking prey. The air between them crackled with unspoken urgency, a tension so thick it felt like a living thing pressing against their chests. They were peeling back the layers of Grant's web, and every page turned brought them closer to the heart of something monstrous. Willis's hand froze mid-motion, clutching a single sheet that trembled slightly in his grip. Chloe, you've got to see this, he said, his voice low but edged with a raw intensity that made her stomach lurch. He slid the paper across the coffee table, its surface scarred with coffee rings and ink smudges. Chloe's eyes darted over the text, a dizzying list of transactions, each line a thread tying Grant to a murky consulting firm cloaked in secrecy. The numbers were obscene, some so vast they seemed to mock the very idea of justice, and the dates aligned with chilling precision to the pivotal moments in Caleb's case. Her breath hitched as the implications sank in. This isn't just some side hustle, Willis pressed, leaning forward, his knuckles whitening around the armrest. This firm, Blackstone Consulting, they're not just working for Grant, they're a pipeline, funneling cash to politicians, CEOs, people with real power. This is bigger than we ever imagined. Chloe's forehead creased, her mind racing as she absorbed the weight of his words. The room felt smaller, the stacks of paper looming like sentinels guarding a truth too dangerous to touch. If we can follow this money, she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, we can unmask everyone tangled up in this mess. But this, she tapped the document, this isn't enough. We need more than a single thread to unravel the whole tapestry. Willis's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the floor as if he could see the risks piling up there. That's the problem, Chloe. Digging deeper means stepping into the line of fire. These people, they don't just bury their secrets. They bury anyone who gets too close. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed sharply against her thigh, shattering the moment. She fished it out, her pulse quickening as she read the message from an unknown number. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Her stomach twisted into a knot, a cold dread seeping into her bones. She tilted the screen toward Willis, whose face darkened as he let out a string of curses under his breath. They're trying to rattle you, he growled, his voice rough with defiance. It won't work. Chloe forced a nod, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the unease gnawing at her resolve. Maybe not, she replied, her tone sharper than she intended, but it's a warning we can't ignore. Willis leaned closer, his presence a solid anchor in the chaos. Chloe, this isn't a game to them. You keep pushing, and they'll hit back harder than you're ready for. Her jaw clenched, a fire flaring in her chest. Then we hit back harder. We've clawed our way too far to turn back now. The words hung between them, a vow sealed in the dim light of Lily's apartment, as the weight of their mission settled deeper into their souls. That evening, the tension spiraled into something suffocating when the news broke like a thunderclap across the screen. Victor Grant had vanished. Footage flickered on the television, grainy images of him striding out of the courthouse, his tailored suit pristine despite the chaos, his bail granted in a move that reeked of corruption. Now, no one knew where he'd gone. Willis slumped back against the couch, his voice a bitter rasp. He's running. He knows the walls are closing in. Chloe's phone rang then, shrill and insistent. Cutting through the haze, it was Sarah, her voice tight and clipped, skipping any greeting. Grant's gone, Chloe. He's pulling every string he's got, buying time, maybe disappearing for good. We've got to move fast. Chloe's mind spun, a whirlwind of strategies and fears. What do you need from us? She asked, gripping the phone like a lifeline. More evidence. Sarah shot back. That article we've got is a spark, but we need a bonfire, something so ironclad the courts, the public, even his cronies can't look away. We're on it, Chloe said, her voice a steel blade slicing through the doubt. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. The city's pulse muted as Chloe and Willis rendezvoused in a cramped, rented office on the outskirts, a sanctuary of peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. They worked with a relentless rhythm, tracing the money's twisted path through a labyrinth of shell companies and coded accounts. Each discovery was a gut punch, names of the powerful etched in black ink, their influence bought and paid for by Grant's dirty hands. By midday, Chloe's fingers brushed against a buried treasure, an internal memo from Blackstone Consulting, its language cold and clinical, outlining orders to silence whistleblowers and shield their high-value clients. Grant's name blazed across the page, a damning signature amid a roster of complicity. Her heart pounded, adrenaline flooding her veins as she held it up. This is it, Willis. This proves they've been burying the truth all along. He nodded, his face grim but resolute. Now we just need to get it to the right people. As they gathered their things to leave, Chloe's phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Another threat. You were warned. Last chance to walk away. Her hands shook, the screen blurring as fear and fury warred within her. Willis caught her gaze, his frown deepening. They're upping the ante. We've got to be smarter about this. Chloe shook her head, her voice cutting through the haze. Smart won't win this. Bold will. If they're scared, it means we're close. That evening, she met Sarah in a tucked-away cafe, the air thick with the scent of espresso and whispered secrets. She slid the memo across the table, watching Sarah's face harden as she scanned the words. "This is dynamite," Sarah murmured, her eyes sharp with purpose. "But it's going to paint a bigger target on your back. You sure you're ready for that?" Chloe's answer was instant, unyielding. "I don't care. As long as Grant and his whole rotten network face the music." Sarah gave a curt nod. "I'll get this out there. Brace yourself for the fallout." The next day, an investigator's call jolted Chloe from a restless half-sleep. "We've verified your documents," he said, his tone clipped but tinged with respect. "They're rock solid. But we're missing one piece, Grant himself. Without him in custody, this case could stall." Her resolve solidified, a cold steel core forming within her. "Then we'll find him." Night fell, heavy and still, as she and Willis crept toward the unassuming office building that housed Blackstone Consulting's headquarters. The structure loomed in the darkness, its glass facade glinting like the eyes of a predator. Inside lay the final fragments of evidence they needed to topple Grant's empire. Chloe adjusted her backpack, its weight a comforting Burden laptop, USB drives, tools for the fight. "We get in, grab what we need, and get out," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cool air. Willis nodded, his face taut with nerves. "If we're caught, this whole thing blows up." "Then we don't get caught," she shot back, her determination a shield against the fear. The building's interior was a maze of shadows and silence, its hallways lined with glass-walled offices that reflected their every move. Willis had disabled the alarm earlier, a feat of ingenuity that bought them a fleeting window. They moved like phantoms, their footsteps a faint echo as they climbed to the second floor, where the server room waited. Willis knelt before the door, his toolkit clinking softly as he worked the lock. Chloe's pulse thundered in her ears, each second stretching into eternity. "Hurry," she hissed, her voice barely a breath. "I'm trying," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. The lock gave with a faint click, and the door groaned open, revealing a cool, humming sanctuary of blinking lights and whirring machines. Willis plugged in a USB drive, the screen flaring to life as he dove into the firm's digital underbelly. Chloe stood guard, her senses razor-sharp. "How long?" she asked. 10 minutes, maybe less," he replied, his fingers a blur. Then a sound: footsteps, faint but growing closer. Chloe stiffened, her breath snagging in her throat. "Someone's coming," she whispered, panic clawing at her. Willis swore, his voice a harsh rasp. "Stall them, I need more time." She peered out, spotting the security guards advancing, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she stepped into the hall, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Hey," one barked, his beam pinning her like a spotlight. "What the hell are you doing here?" She forced her voice to steady, her mind racing for a lifeline. "I know this looks bad, but hear me out." The second guard loomed closer, suspicion etched into his weathered face. "You've got 30 seconds. Chloe pulled a USB drive from her pocket, holding it up like a talisman. "This is proof bribery. Fraud. Crimes your bosses are neck-deep in. People like Victor Grant. Check it if you don't believe me." The first guard's eyes narrowed, skepticism warring with curiosity. "You think we'll just let you waltz out of here because you say so?" "No," she countered, her voice firm despite the tremor in her legs. "But if you stop me, you're shielding liars who'd sell you out in a heartbeat to save their own skins. Let us finish this. We're not here to hurt anyone, ace, to stop people like Grant from destroying more lives." The guards exchanged a glance, uncertainty flickering between them. After an agonizing pause, the second guard lowered his light. 5 minutes, if you're still here. We're calling it in." Relief flooded her, sharp and brief. "Thank you," she breathed, slipping back into the server room. "Time's ticking," she told Willis, shutting the door with a soft thud. "Almost there," he said, his voice taut as the screen flashed with copied files. "Got it." They packed up, moving with swift precision, and darted into the stairwell only to freeze as more footsteps echoed below. "Back up." Willis hissed. Chloe's eyes darted around, landing on a side door labeled storage. She yanked it open, pulling him into a cramped, cluttered space stacked with boxes and dust-choked shelves. They crouched behind a pile of crates, the air thick with the scent of mildew and fear. Outside, voices barked orders: search everywhere. They're here somewhere, and Chloe's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms. Time crawled, each second a test of her fraying nerves, until the sounds faded into silence. She peeked out, motioning Willis to follow, and they slipped through a side exit into the night's embrace. That was too damn close, Willis panted, his voice unsteady. Chloe nodded, her body still thrumming with adrenaline. But we got it. Back at their safe house, she plugged the USB into her laptop, the screen illuminating a trove of damning truths, fabricated evidence, bribery schemes, payment logs tying Grant to a constellation of corrupt elites. Willis stared, his voice hushed with awe. This is everything. Chloe's gaze hardened, a fierce resolve burning through her exhaustion. We take this to the law. Let them face the consequences of their greed. In that moment, the lesson crystallized. Justice wasn't just a quiet hope. It was a blade, forged in courage, to cut through the rod of power abused. And for every life Grant had crushed, every lie he'd spun, the reckoning was coming. The air was thick with anticipation as Chloe Evans clutched the final pieces of evidence. In her trembling hands, her pulse quickening with every breath, years of sleepless nights, whispered fears, and relentless determination had funneled into this single, defining moment. She stood on the precipice of her greatest challenge yet, dragging Victor Grant, a man whose name carried the weight of unshakable power, and his sprawling web of corruption into the unforgiving light of a courtroom. Justice, she thought, wasn't just a word, it was a reckoning, a force she'd wielded like a blade to carve through the lies that had shielded him for far too long. The stillness of dawn splintered as unmarked police vehicles roared into view, their sirens slicing through the quiet like a scream. Chloe lingered at a cautious distance, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the scene unfold. Victor Grant's estate loomed ahead, a gaudy monument to his arrogance. Its manicured lawns and towering columns now swarmed by agents in dark, tactical gear. Their movements were a symphony of precision boots pounding the earth, voices barking commands with razor-sharp clarity. This raid, meticulously planned over months of covert meetings and painstaking evidence gathering, was the culmination of her every hope and fear. Beside her, Detective Ramirez stood like a sentinel, his weathered face etched with resolve as he surveyed the chaos. "This is it," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much yet still believed in the fight. "We've got him." Chloe's fingers tightened around her phone, the device a lifeline to the countless documents, witness testimonies, and risks she'd taken to reach this day. She'd been the linchpin, the one who'd pieced together the puzzle when others had turned away, too afraid or too jaded to challenge Grant's reign. Her breath caught as the estate's heavy oak doors buckled under the force of a battering ram, splintering apart to unleash a flood of officers into the opulent interior. Shouts reverberated from within, bouncing off marble floors and gilded walls as the search began in earnest. Inside his study, Victor Grant stood cornered, a predator finally ensnared. Papers were strewn across his desk, a half-packed suitcase gaping open beside him, a silent confession of his intent to flee. His face contorted with rage, eyes blazing with the fury of a man unaccustomed to defeat. As agents seized his arms and wrenched them behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs locking into place was drowned out by his bellowing protests. "You're making a mistake," he roared, his voice a thunderclap that rattled the room. "This is a setup. Do you have any idea who I am?" An officer, unfazed by the outburst, met his glare with icy calm. "Victor Grant, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Grant's defiance only grew louder, his words spitting venom. "This is a farce. I've done nothing wrong." Detective Ramirez stepped forward, his presence a wall of unyielding authority as Grant was dragged toward the door. "Save it for the court," Ramirez said, his tone as cold and unmovable as stone. Outside, Chloe watched, her chest tight with a cocktail of triumph and dread, as Grant was shoved toward a waiting police cruiser. His eyes, wild with desperation, locked onto hers across the distance, and for a fleeting second, time seemed to halt. "You think this is over, don't you?" he sneered, his voice cutting through the clamor like a blade. "You have no idea what you've started. This isn't the end, little girl, it's just the beginning." Chloe held his stare, her jaw clenched, refusing to let his words pierce the armor she'd built. "It's over for you, Grant," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. "You're done." The car door slammed shut, muffling his threats, but the echo of his malice lingered in the air. The raid pressed on, agents tearing through the estate with methodical ruthlessness. Drawers were yanked open, computers seized, and stacks of files carted away, each item a potential thread to unravel Grant's empire. Chloe remained on the sidelines, her mind a whirlwind of memories, late nights poring over documents, the faces of witnesses too terrified to speak, the constant shadow of danger lurking at her heels. Willis, her steadfast ally through it all, joined her, his broad shoulders slumping slightly with exhaustion. His eyes, usually sharp with determination, softened as he glanced at her. "They've got him," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "For now," Chloe replied, her tone laced with caution. She knew men like Grant too well, slippery, resourceful, always searching for a crack to slither through. People like him don't go down without a fight. He'll twist the system, just like he always has. Willis nodded, his expression darkening. "Then make sure he can't." As the last of the agents filed out, Ramirez approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. "The evidence you gave use it was the tipping point," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "We've got enough to bury him for years, but we need to lock it down tight. No loose ends." Chloe met his gaze, her resolve hardening. If he finds even a sliver of weakness, he'll exploit it. He's built his life on that. Ramirez's jaw tightened, a flicker of determination flashing in his eyes. "We're covering every angle. Trust me, he's not slipping through this time." That evening, Chloe stumbled into Lily's cramped apartment, her body heavy with fatigue, her mind buzzing with the day's events. She sank onto the worn couch, the image of Grant in handcuffs replaying like a film reel, his snarling face, the clink of metal, the fleeting taste of victory overshadowed by his chilling warning. Lily, her closest confidant, perched across from her, her gentle brown eyes studying Chloe with quiet concern. "You did it," she said softly, her voice a balm against the raw edges of Chloe's nerves. Chloe shook her head, a weary sigh escaping her lips. "We won a battle, but the war's far from over. I still need to clear Caleb's name." Lily leaned forward, her tone firm yet warm. "You've come this far, Chloe. You'll finish this, you know you will." With Grant behind bars, Chloe redirected her focus to the mission that had fueled her every step, proving her brother Caleb's innocence. The courtroom was a cavern of tension, its high ceilings and polished wood amplifying the silence as she sat in the front row of the appeals hearing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched the defense attorney, a man she'd spent countless hours preparing, alongside her eyes, with an air of quiet confidence. Today was the pinnacle of her fight, the day she'd dreamed of through every tear-soaked night and whispered prayer, the day Caleb might finally walk free. Judge Harper, a stern figure with a reputation for fairness, adjusted his glasses, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. "This court will now hear the appeal in the case of Caleb Evans versus the state," he announced, his voice a steady anchor in the charged atmosphere. "Counsel, you may proceed." The attorney stood, a thick binder of evidence cradled in his arms like a sacred text. "Your Honor, we've uncovered substantial new evidence that dismantles the prosecution's original case against Mr. Evans," he began, his words measured yet forceful. "This evidence not only clears his name, but exposes Victor Grant and his associates as the architects of a scheme to frame him." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery as the attorney presented a dossier, security footage, internal memos, financial records so painstakingly unearthed by Chloe and Willis. The courtroom dimmed as the grainy video flickered to life on a screen, revealing Grant's unmistakable figure lunging in aggression, shattering the false narrative that had condemned Caleb. Gasps punctuated the silence, the truth laid bare for all to see. This footage, the attorney continued, was deliberately buried by those shielding Mr. Grant. Bank records further reveal payments to key players who ensured its suppression. The prosecutor rose, her face taut with strain. "Your Honor, while this evidence is compelling," we'd argue Judge Harper silenced her with a raised hand, his expression unyielding. "This isn't the time for debate. The evidence stands unless you can disprove it," the prosecutor faltered, then sank back into her seat, her silence a tacit surrender. Chloe's heart thudded wildly as the attorney delivered his closing plea. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of wrongful imprisonment. Today, this court can right that wrong and restore his freedom." Judge Harper leaned forward, his face a mask of contemplation. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" he asked. "No, Your Honor," came the quiet reply. The judge straightened, his voice cutting through the stillness. "This court has reviewed the new evidence and finds it credible and damning. Caleb Evans's conviction is vacated, and all charges are dismissed. He is to be released immediately." The words crashed over Chloe like a tidal wave, tears spilling down her cheeks as the room erupted in cheers. She rose on shaky legs as Caleb turned to her, his face alight with disbelief and joy, mirroring the storm of emotions within her. He crossed the distance between them, the chains of injustice falling away with every step, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "You actually did it." Chloe drew back, tears streaming freely. "We did it," she said, her voice quivering. "I couldn't have kept going without your faith in me." Outside, their parents waited in the hallway, their mother sobbing as she enveloped Caleb in her arms, their father's proud, choked words filling the air. Chloe stepped aside, watching the reunion with a heart swollen by relief and love. This was why she'd fought through every threat, every doubt to see her family whole again. Caleb turned to her, his eyes glistening. "Chloe, you fought for me when no one else would. I'll never repay you." She smiled, exhaustion giving way to peace. "You don't have to. Your trust was enough." As they stepped into the sunlight, reporters swarmed, their questions a barrage of noise. "Miss Evans, how does it feel to clear your brother's name?" One shouted. "It feels right," she said simply. "Caleb deserved justice, and now he has it." Another pressed forward. "What's next for you?" Chloe paused, glancing at Caleb, who nodded in quiet encouragement. "I've seen how broken the system can be," she said, her voice steady with newfound purpose. "I want to help fix it." That night, as the family celebrated Caleb's freedom, Chloe sat by the window, the day's triumphs and trials swirling in her mind. Caleb joined her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to change lives, Chloe," he said, his faith in her unshakable. She smiled, her resolve deepening. Justice wasn't just a victory, it was a lesson, a warning that power, when abused, would inevitably face its reckoning, and she was just beginning to wield it. In the hushed expanse of the courtroom, she smoothed the crisp lines of her blazer, her fingers trembling ever so slightly not from fear, but from the electric pulse of purpose surging through her. Her eyes, fierce and unyielding, swept across the space as she placed her weathered briefcase on the defense table with a soft thud that seemed to ripple through the air, commanding attention. This wasn't just another day at work. This was her battleground, her client's lifeline, and the culmination of every bruise, every tear, every sleepless night she'd endured to stand here. She carried the weight of it all with a quiet, unshakable resolve that filled the room like a storm gathering on the horizon. Across the polished wooden floor, the prosecution lounged with the ease of a man who'd long ago lost count of his victories. His tailored suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he watched her clushful through her notes with meticulous care. To him, she was a novice, a fleeting annoyance, her determination little more than a child's stubborn tantrum. It was a look she knew intimately, one that had shadowed her through countless rooms like this one. But she'd spent years sharpening her mind and spirit against that very disdain, turning it into fuel, breaking it apart until it was nothing but dust beneath her feet. The heavy door creaked open, and the judge strode in, his black robe billowing like a dark cloud. The room fell silent, a collective breath held as everyone rose. Chloe stood tall, feeling the gravity of the moment settle into her Bonessa burden she'd trained herself to bear, not just with strength, but with pride. "Court is now in session," the judge's voice boomed, deep and steady. slicing through the tension. The case before them was no simple matter. A young single mother, her life already a fragile thread, stood accused of stealing from her employer, a towering corporate giant with resources that dwarfed her own. The evidence was flimsy, a patchwork of half-truths and vague suspicions, but Chloe knew the fight ahead would be steep. She also knew the cracks in the system, cracks she'd slipped through herself, cracks she'd widened with her own hands. The prosecution launched into his opening with the swagger of a seasoned predator, his words dripping with certainty as he painted the defendant as a reckless opportunist, a liar who'd betrayed the trust of a benevolent employer. He leaned on dry company policies, pointed to murky inventory records, and waved away any notion of accountability from those above her. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, a performance polished by years of bending juries to his will. When he sat, that smirk flickered again, as if the outcome was already etched in stone. Then it was her turn. Chloe rose, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she approached the jury. Her heart thudded, not with doubt, but with the fire of conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady yet resonant, like a bell tolling through fog. "What we're witnessing here isn't a tale of theft, it's a story of convenience. My client, a woman who pours every ounce of herself into raising her child, has been cast as a scapegoat to mask the failures of a company too careless to look within. The evidence I'll present will reveal not just the flimsiness of these accusations, but the deliberate deception behind them." Her words lingered, heavy and deliberate, and she caught the flicker of curiosity in a juror's eye, the subtle tilt of a head. It was a start. As the trial unfolded, Chloe moved with the precision of a surgeon and the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. She'd learned these skills in the crucible of her own struggles, each lesson etched into her soul. When Mr. Harper, a weary company supervisor with a pinched face and a nervous tic, took the stand, she zeroed in. "Mr. Harper," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass, "you testified that you uncovered this so-called theft during an internal audit. Is that right?" He nodded curtly, his jaw tight. "Yes," she paced slightly, letting the silence stretch. "And during that audit, did you bother to check if anyone else's another employee had access to the same inventory?" Harper's eyes darted sideways, his fingers twitching against the stand. I suppose we could have looked into that," he mumbled. Chloe's face remained a mask of calm, but inside, her pulse quickened. "You could have," she echoed, "but you didn't. Instead, you zeroed in on my client. Why?" Harper shifted, his collar suddenly too tight, his confidence unraveling. "She was responsible for that section," he muttered, but the words sounded hollow. Chloe stepped closer, her voice unwavering, a blade honed to perfection. "So you assumed her guilt without digging deeper? Couldn't those discrepancies have stemmed from a simple accounting mistake? Or even someone else's actions?" Harper's mouth opened, then closed, his stammer a faint. I can't say for sure." She turned to the jury, her gaze piercing. "Exactly. Yet here we are, with a mother's entire future teetering on the edge because of guesses and shortcuts." The jurors leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others exchanging glances that hinted at doubt taking root. The courtroom buzzed with smaller moments, tumults that swelled with unspoken stories. The bailiff, a grizzled man with a limp and a kind smile, watched Chloe with quiet admiration, his own daughter's struggles as a single parent echoing in his mind. The court reporter, a young woman with tired eyes, typed furiously, her own dreams of law school flickering as she absorbed Chloe's every move. Even the janitor, sweeping the halls during a recess, paused to listen through the cracked door, nodding as if he, too, knew what it meant to be judged by a system that didn't care to see the truth. In her closing argument, Chloe stood before the jury, her voice a blend of steel and soul, trembling with the weight of what she carried. "My client isn't a thief," she said, each word slicing through the stillness. "She's a casualty of a machine that values profit over people, a system that's quick to accuse but slow to question itself. The prosecution has thrown shadows at Yauhelf-baked investigations, easy scapegoats, but they've failed to shine a light on the truth." She stepped closer to the jury box, her eyes locking with theirs, imploring, fierce. "Justice isn't built on assumptions, it's forged in truth. And the truth is, This woman deserves to leave here with her head held high, her freedom intact, her dignity whole. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the raw, unshakable belief that fueled her. The jury deliberated for hours, the clock's hands creeping forward as tension coiled tighter in the room. Chloe sat still, her hands folded, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every pause. She'd left nothing on the table, no angle unexamined, no fight unfought. When the foreman finally rose and the words "not guilty" rang out, the air seemed to shatter. Chloe exhaled a deep, shuddering breath, and a smile bright, unguarded, broke across her face. Beside her, the young mother dissolved into sobs, her shoulders shaking as relief flooded through her. She turned to Chloe, grasping her hands with a desperation born of gratitude. Her voice a broken whisper, "Thank you. You saved my life." Chloe squeezed back, her own eyes glistening. "You deserve justice. That's all I fought for." As the courtroom emptied, Chloe lingered, sinking into her chair. The silence wrapped around her, and she let her thoughts drift to Caleb, whose name she'd once fought to clear, to Victor Gran, whose shadow had nearly swallowed her family whole, to the faceless others still trapped in the gears of a broken system. Each memory hardened her resolve, a steel thread weaving through her core. This was her calling, her reason for rising each morning. Later, she stood outside the courthouse, the city's lights twinkling like stars against the velvet night. The cool air brushed her skin, and she felt the dual pull of duty and exhilaration. She wasn't the timid girl who'd once trembled before Judge Morrison, mocked and dismissed. She was Chloe Evans Saturny, advocate, warrior. Her path was a testament to the power of standing firm, a beacon for anyone staring down a world built to crush them. The lesson was clear. Justice wasn't a gift handed down, it was a fire stoked by those brave enough to demand it. And when power was abused, when the mighty preyed on the vulnerable, the consequences rippled far beyond the courtroom, shaking the foundations of trust and truth. This was her fight, and she'd carry it forward, one case, one life, one stand at a time.